For 5,000 years, humanity kept a secret, not a small secret. Not a hidden grave or a buried treasure or a forgotten king. A secret so enormous, so dangerous, so world-ending in its implications, that entire civilizations were built around concealing it. Governments rose and fell, protecting it. Wars were fought not to conquer land, but to keep certain people away from certain places. Religions were quietly shaped to discourage the wrong kind of curiosity. Languages were invented solely to encode its location, and through it all, through every plague, every ice age, every crumbling empire, a small, disciplined, unbroken group of human beings never forgot their purpose. They called themselves the Wardens. And the Wardens had one job: guard the archive. Keep it sealed. Keep it hidden. Keep it safe from everyone, including themselves, including their own leaders, including every conqueror and king and emperor who ever demanded to know the secret. The answer was always the same. There is no secret. There is nothing here. You are looking for something that does not exist. Move on. And somehow, for 5,000 years, it worked. The Galactic Sovereignty first detected the anomaly on a Tuesday. Not that they called it Tuesday, of course. Their calendar was measured in rotations of a dying star 17 light years from Earth. But in human reckoning, it was a Tuesday in late autumn. The kind of cold, gray, unremarkable Tuesday where nothing good is supposed to happen. A sovereignty survey vessel, the contemplation of distant orders, was conducting a routine deep scan of the Sol system. Standard procedure for newly contacted civilizations. Map the system, catalog the resources, assess the species, determine threat level. Humanity had been formally contacted 8 months prior. The assessment had been filed as moderately intelligent, emotionally unstable, biologically unusual, threat level negligible. The Sovereignty had been wrong about that last part. They were about to discover exactly how wrong. Commander Vetheron of the Contemplation stood at the scan array, his 4 sensory stalks twitching with mild, professional interest. The scan was routine. The Sol system was unremarkable in nearly every measurable way. One habitable world, one oversized moon, a cluttered asteroid belt. The humans themselves were fascinating in a pitiable sort of way. They had only just achieved faster-than-light capability 3 years ago. They were infants by galactic standards. Loud, messy, passionate, surprisingly creative infants. Vetheron had seen dozens of species at this stage. They all followed roughly the same pattern: wonder, ambition, territorial skirmishes, slow integration into sovereignty culture. He expected the humans to follow the same path. Tente Deep Scan hit something it absolutely should not have. Vetheron's stalks shot upright. "Run that again," he said quietly. The scan technician complied. The result was identical. Buried beneath the Anatolian plateau in the region humans called Turkey, beneath 400 meters of ancient bedrock and compressed soil, the scan had found something. Something that categorically, impossibly, should not exist on a pre-contact world. No Rularu, not metal, not any alloy within human manufacturing capability. Something else entirely. Something old. Something that made the Sovereignty's most advanced sensors scream with confused, contradictory data. The readings were clean in some places, and completely incoherent in others, as if the vault was simultaneously present and somehow outside normal spatial reference. Vetheron stared at the readout for a long, silent moment. "Get me the Sovereignty Council," he said, immediately. If you're gripped by this story already, smash that like button right now. Hit subscribe so you never miss a story like this one, and share it with someone who loves epic science fiction. Your support means everything, and it keeps these stories coming. The Sovereignty Council convened within the hour. 12 species. 12 representatives. one unified voice of galactic authority. They had governed this arm of the galaxy for 11,000 years. They had seen things that would unmake a human mind entirely. But the readout from the contemplation made 3 of the 12 representatives go very still in a way that spoke of deep, instinctual, ancestral fear. "That signature," said the Verkai delegate, her crystalline body flickering rapidly with distress. "That is a pre-silence signature." The chamber went utterly quiet. The pre-silence. That was not a term anyone used lightly. It referred to an era before recorded galactic history, an era known only through fragments, ruins, dead star systems, and whispered warnings, an era that ended not with a whimper but with something so catastrophic that it had stripped entire solar systems bare and left others simply gone. Not destroyed, not burned. Gone. As if they had been quietly edited out of the universe, and somehow, impossibly, a pre-silence vault was sitting beneath a human city, beneath a world that had been scrabbling in the dirt with wooden plows. When the vault was presumably sealed. "How long has it been there?" someone asked. The scan analysis came back quickly. At minimum, 50,000 years. More likely, 200,000. Possibly longer than that. "And the humans?" the council chair asked slowly. "Do they know?" That question would prove far more complicated than anyone in that chamber expected. The sovereignty sent a diplomatic envoy to Earth. Not their usual junior ambassadors. Not the standard first contact protocol team. This time they sent Archdiplomat Sorvinikal herself. She was 300 years old. She had negotiated 47 first contacts, and she had never, in 3 centuries of diplomatic service, been nervous. She was nervous now. She arrived at United Earth Government headquarters in Geneva with a team of 12 specialists, 6 security personnel, and a carefully prepared speech about cooperative archaeological discovery and shared galactic heritage. She never got to give that speech. Because when she arrived, she found that Secretary General Amara Asamensa was already waiting for her with a look on her face that Sovanakal had never seen on a newly contacted species. It was not wonder. It was not the usual mixture of excitement and fear. It was something that looked uncomfortably, unmistakably like resignation. "You found it," the Secretary General said. Not a question. Sorvenikal's translator worked perfectly. She understood every word. She still took a long moment before responding. "You knew it was there," she said. "Yes," said the Secretary General. "For how long?" Amara Samensa folded her hands carefully on the desk before her. "Our written records go back 5,000 years, but our oral traditions suggest we have known for much longer than that." Sorvenikal sat down heavily in a chair not designed for her physiology. "What is in the vault?" she asked. The Secretary General was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, "Everything." The briefing that followed lasted 11 hours without a break. Sorvenikal was given access to documents that her team's historians would later describe as the most significant find in galactic recorded memory. The humans had not stumbled upon the vault by accident. Their ancestors had been told about it. By whom? Or what? Remained a matter still debated among the wardens. Some believed it had been the last surviving members of a pre-silence civilization. Others believed the instruction had come from something stranger still, something that existed before the pre-silence, before the civilizations that caused it. But the content of the instruction was consistent across every version of the story, across every culture and language in which it had been preserved. A vault exists beneath your world. It contains the technology of a civilization that nearly destroyed everything. You must guard it. You must never open it. You must never let anyone else open it. And you must never, under any circumstances, use what is inside. Not until the galaxy is ready. The Wardens had been founded in response to that instruction, organized, initially as a priesthood in ancient Anatolia around 3000 BCE, later splintering into dozens of different orders across the globe, adapting to each era, each culture, each political reality, each technological shift, but always maintaining the same unbroken core purpose: guard the archive, keep the seal, trust no one who has not sworn the oath. Sorvin Nakaal read through translations of Warden texts going back to 3000 BCE. She read accounts of warden operatives embedded in ancient Egypt. She read of warden cells operating within Rome. She read about a warden network that had operated inside the Mongol administration. She read about a warden cell that had infiltrated the Ottoman government, specifically to prevent a certain archaeological expedition from proceeding. She read about 2 world wars that had, in part, been quietly influenced to redirect certain powerful nations away from certain excavation sites, not caused by the wardens. Never caused, but shaped, subtly, at the margins, to protect the secret. By the time the briefing was over, Sorvenikal was not certain whether to be horrified or completely, profoundly awed. "How many wardens are there?" she asked. "Currently active," the Secretary General said. "About 12,000. And the rest of humanity? They don't know. Most don't. Some suspect. We've always found it easier to manage that way. And you're telling me now because you found it anyway." The Secretary General paused, and because we think it might finally be time, the news reached the Sovereignty Council in pieces. The first piece was that humanity had known about the Vault. That caused significant alarm among every member species. The second piece was that humanity had been actively guarding the Vault for at least 5,000 years, possibly much longer. That caused something closer to complete disbelief. A species with wooden plows 5,000 years ago had been trusted with this. A species that had only just discovered faster than light travel 3 years ago. The third piece was the content analysis. Sovereignty scientists, working alongside human wardens in strictly controlled conditions, spent 3 weeks scanning the Vault from every possible angle using every instrument the most advanced civilization in the known galaxy possessed. They never opened it. The wardens wouldn't permit that. Not yet. But the scans alone were enough to cause the 3 Verkai delegates to enter what their species called the stillness, a state of shock so profound that their metabolic functions nearly ceased entirely. The Verkai were not easily shocked. They had existed for 9,000 years. They had seen things. This shook them to their crystalline cores, because the scans confirmed what the pre-silent signature had suggested. The Vault contained weapons. Not kinetic weapons. Not even nuclear weapons, though those were present as well. Weapons of a kind that the Sovereignty had only theorized might be possible. Reality weapons. Technology that did not destroy matter or energy in any conventional sense. Technology that unmade the laws governing matter and energy. A device that could, in theory, alter the fundamental constants of physics in a localized region of space. Turn off gravity. Reverse entropy. Stop the strong nuclear force. Detonate a star by convincing it that fusion was no longer physically possible. Or worse. The Sovereignty's lead physicist, a being called Threnve who had lived for 6 centuries, reviewed the scan data and then requested a medical leave. She spent 2 full days in her quarters. When she returned, she made a single formal statement. If these devices function as the scan data indicates, a single one used carelessly could initiate a cascade reaction that would unmake this entire galactic arm within 400 years. Silence in the chamber. Complete, ringing, absolute silence. There are, she added, 47 distinct devices in the Vault. The silence deepened. Each one, she finished, appears to be significantly more powerful than the last. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat right now, please hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel, and share this with a friend who needs to hear it. Every single share helps us reach more science fiction fans. Thank you so much for being here. The political fallout was immediate, intense, and deeply revealing. 14 Sovereignty member species demanded the Vault be destroyed immediately. 6 demanded it be moved off-planet to a secure Sovereignty facility. 3 demanded it be studied under full Sovereignty scientific supervision. 2 said nothing at all, which the experienced diplomats found most alarming of all. And through every debate, every demand, every threat, and implication in formal motion, the humans said, "No, not." Not aggressively, not with military posturing or veiled ultimatums, simply, quietly, with a calm that was somehow more unsettling than anger. No, It stays where it is, said Secretary General Simonsa. The wardens maintain custody. Nothing changes until we agree together that it should. You are a pre-contact species, the Sovereignty Chair said, carefully, not unkindly. You have been spacefaring, by our standards, for 3 years. You have been civilized, by any common measure, for a fraction of recorded history. You cannot seriously claim the right to steward technology of this magnitude. With respect, said the Secretary General, and her voice was very steady, we have been doing exactly that for 5,000 years, possibly 50,000, if our oral traditions are accurate. Without an incident, without a breach, without even a close call that we are aware of. What is your civilization's track record with technology of this kind? The question landed like a dropped weapon on a stone floor, because the honest answer was, the sovereignty had no such technology. They had never possessed it. The only civilization known to have possessed it had used it to end themselves, and nearly everything else along with them. The silence that followed was long and uncomfortable and entirely deserved. It was the Verkai delegate who finally spoke. Her name was Crystalline Morninglight, which translated awkwardly into most languages, but was considered a name of tremendous honor among her people. She had been in the stillness since the third piece of news arrived, but now she spoke, and when she did, her voice carried the resonance of deep crystalline harmonics that even the best translator struggled to fully render. There is a story, she said, that my people tell only to our eldest. A story passed down by memory and ceremony for as long as we have kept records. A story about the time before the silence, about the civilization that built these things. The chamber was utterly, absolutely still. In our story, she continued, that civilization did not simply destroy themselves. They knew what they had built. They understood what it could do. And at the very end, when they understood that they could not survive, they made a choice. They chose a world, a young world. A world whose people were still learning to stand upright, to make fire, to bury their dead. They chose it because it was far from everything important, because its people were young enough to be given a terrible burden without being immediately broken or corrupted by it. And they placed everything they had built, every terrible, magnificent thing, into a vault, and they left instructions. She paused. Her crystalline body rang softly with something that sounded, even in translation, like grief. We always believed this was a myth, she said quietly. A parable about responsibility and sacrifice. A story told to make young Verkai think carefully about what they build. We did not believe the world was real. We did not believe the people were real. We did not believe the vault was real. She looked, for the first time in this entire session, directly at Secretary General S. You are the world in our story, she said. You have always been the world in our story, and we have been telling that story for 9,000 years without knowing you were real. The meeting adjourned without resolution. That was normal. Meetings between species rarely resolved anything quickly, but something had shifted in the room that everyone could feel and no one could precisely articulate. Sorvinako could sense it in the quality of the silence, in the way delegates moved when they thought no one was watching them. She requested a private meeting with the Secretary General. It was granted without hesitation. They met in a small room with windows overlooking Lake Geneva. The water was gray and cold. The Alps were barely visible through thick cloud. Can I ask you something personal? Sorvenakal said. You can ask, said the Secretary General. Do you know what's specifically in the vault? Have you ever opened it? Even partially, even just to look inside? The Secretary General was quiet for a moment. Tense sighed no. The standing order has always been that no human being may view the contents of the vault directly. We maintain it. We guard it. We would give our lives to protect it, but we do not look inside. It was decided by the original wardens 5,000 years ago that, knowing too specifically and too clearly what was inside, would eventually lead to someone deciding to use it. Knowledge becomes temptation at a certain threshold. The wardens understood that threshold better than most, and no one ever broke that rule. In 5,000 years, 3 times, said the Secretary General, 3 individuals, across all those centuries, broke Warden Protocol and attempted to access the vault directly. What happened to them? 2 were stopped by other wardens before they penetrated the inner seal. 1 made it inside. And The Secretary General looked out at the gray lake for a long moment. She came out 3 days later. She hadn't aged a single day, but her hair had gone completely white, and she never spoke another word for the remaining 40 years of her life. Not a word. Not a whisper. She spent those 40 years writing. We still have the writings. Our theologians and philosophers largely agree they are the most important documents in human intellectual history. None of them have been made public. They are kept in the archive annex, under warden seal, separate from the vault itself. Sir Venekal absorbed this carefully. What do the writings say? The Secretary General finally looked directly at her. That the things in the vault are not tools, she said. They are not weapons, exactly. In any sense, we usually mean the word. They are more like arguments, mathematical arguments, constructed in metal and structured energy in folded space-time, that make the case for a particular answer to a particular question. What question? Whether existence should continue. The lake was very quiet. The Alps had disappeared entirely behind the cloud. The civilization that built the vault, the Secretary General said, had reached a point in their development where they could answer that question either way, yes or no, and make the answer stick. Not just for themselves. For everything. For all of Italiano, the vault doesn't just contain weapons of mass destruction. It contains an argument for annihilation, worked out to its mathematical completion, and an argument for continuation, and 45 other positions existing somewhere between those two. The woman who went inside understood all of them, all 47 arguments. In 3 days, that is why she never spoke again. Not because she was broken, because she had seen the full shape of the question and understood that most minds are simply not built to hold that shape, without it changing everything about how they exist in the world. She chose silence over the alternative being speaking and changing everything too soon. If you're deep in this story and feeling every word of it, please hit like, hit subscribe, and share this video with someone right now. These stories live and die by your support. Thank you for watching. The negotiations over the vault lasted 3 full years. 3 years of formal sessions and private meetings and back-channel conversations. 3 years of proposals and counter-proposals and scientific briefings and philosophical debates that stretched across entire weeks. More than a few arguments that came very close to something worse. The sovereignty wanted oversight. The humans negotiated the terms of that oversight with a patience and precision that repeatedly, visibly surprised the galactic diplomats. Because the wardens had been practicing this for 5,000 years. They were very good at negotiating the boundaries of a closely held secret. In the end, the agreement was structured like this. The vault would remain on Earth, beneath the Anatolian plateau, exactly where it had always been. The wardens would remain its primary custodians with full operational authority. A small, international sovereignty observation team, drawn from 6 different species, would be permitted to observe, but not to interact with the vault or its contents. No member of any species, human or otherwise, would be permitted to open the vault or access its contents without a unanimous vote of the full Sovereignty Council plus the full Warden Council. Every species, every warden. One dissenting voice anywhere stopped everything. The threshold was designed to be effectively impossible to meet on anything short of full consensus. Deliberately so, by design. Because the humans had insisted on exactly that structure. Why? Sir Venekal asked Secretary General Semensa when the final terms were being drafted and reviewed. Why insist on such an impossibly high threshold? Don't you trust the sovereignty deliberative process? It is not about trust, the Secretary General said without hesitation. The instructions we were given, the original instructions from whoever built the vault, said to keep it sealed until the galaxy's ready. Not until a majority decides it's ready. Not until the powerful and influential species agree it's ready. Until the galaxy is ready. All of it. Together. If even one species, even one legitimate voice in the council says no, then the galaxy is not ready. And the vault stays closed. That is what the instruction meant. We've spent 5,000 years interpreting it. We're fairly confident we understand what it asks of us. Sir Venekal was quiet for a moment. And how will you know, she asked carefully, when the galaxy's actually, genuinely ready? The Secretary General smiled for the first time since this entire situation had begun. It was a tired smile, the smile of someone who has carried something so long it has become part of the shape of them, part of the way they stand, part of the way they breathe. The same way we've known everything else, she said. We will read the writings again. The woman who went inside, her 40 years of words, and this time we will be looking for a different passage. She wrote about readiness, about what it looks like from inside the question. She wrote about signs. We've been reading those passages every year for 4,000 years, waiting for them to start making sense in a new way. The Sovereignty Observation Team arrived on Earth 6 months after the agreement was signed. 12 beings from 6 species, carefully selected for temperament and expertise. They were given a full orientation by the Wardens, which took 3 weeks and covered 5,000 years of recorded guardianship, and an unknowable depth of tradition before that. One of the observers, a young Verkai named Shimmerin Stillwater, kept a detailed personal journal during the orientation period. She would later publish it, with Warden permission and careful editing, and it would become one of the most widely read documents in the modern sovereignty, translated into 38 languages within 5 years. Her first entry, written on her first full day of orientation, read, "They showed us the original instruction today, the one given to the first Wardens, 5,000 years ago, possibly much longer. It has been copied and recopied countless times across countless generations, but the oldest surviving physical version is inscribed on a clay tablet, kept in a sealed preservation case in the Warden Archive building. It is written in a language that no longer exists anywhere in the world except in Warden records and Warden education." I asked the Warden archivist, how long Warden children spend learning this completely dead language, just to be able to read the original instruction in its original form. She said, "All of us learn it, every Warden, from childhood. Before the protocols, before the history, before the technical training, before anything else at all. The first thing a Warden child learns is how to read the instruction in the language it was first written in, so that they always know, in the oldest words available to them, and the words that were chosen by whoever gave the instruction, exactly what they are here to do." I asked her what the instruction says. "Precisely. Exactly." She recited it from memory without hesitating. I had my translator work on it carefully for over an hour. It came back with this: "You are the door. Do not let it open before the world is whole." There was a ceremony, 3 years after the initial discovery. Not a grand ceremony. Not the kind of thing that was broadcast across sovereignty communication networks or reported as breaking news. A small ceremony in a small room in the Warden headquarters, which was itself a deliberately unremarkable 3-story building in a deliberately ordinary district of Ankara, Turkey. Sitting 400 meters directly above the vault, the 12 sovereignty observers attended. The Secretary General attended. The full Warden Council attended, and for the first time in any public or official record, they opened the Warden Archive itself. Not the vault, not its terrible contents, the archive of the Wardens. Their own history. The collected records of 5,000 years of unbroken, unnamed service. The names. All the names. Every Warden. Across every generation. In every era. In every part of the world. Who had kept the oath. The ceremony was to read them aloud. All of them. Every name. It took 4 days. Shimmerin Stillwater wrote in her journal afterward. By the end of the 2nd day, even eldest Van of the Theresi, who has personally witnessed 30,000 years of civilizational history, was doing something that I can only describe as weeping, whether that is the right word for what the Resi do. When they are moved beyond the capacity for language, I genuinely do not know, but there was something happening to her that looked like grief and wonder at once. I do not know how to describe what it felt like to sit in that room for 4 complete days, and hear name after name after name. Ordinary names. Profoundly ordinary human names. Names in Arabic and Sumerian and Latin and Mandarin and Swahili and 100 other languages. Living and dead, names of farmers. Names of merchants. Names of scholars. Names of soldiers. Names of midwives and teachers and weavers and judges. Names of people who lived entire lives, full ordinary lives, without ever telling anyone outside the Order what they carried. People who died in complete obscurity, who history never recorded in any other way, who left no monuments, no famous works, no celebrated deeds, and who kept, in their quiet, unknown, unremarkable lives, the most important secret that the galaxy did not even know it had. By the end of the fourth day, the room was absolutely silent, and then Warden counseled Cheredwoa Mensif, a small elderly woman from Akragana, who looked more like someone's grandmother than a keeper of galactic destiny, stood up and said something I will carry with me for every remaining year of my life. She said, "We are not heroes. We have never claimed to be. We are custodians. We are doorholders. We are the people who were asked to wait and who waited. That is all. We waited." And then she sat down. And somehow, in that moment, in that plain small room above the vault, that was the most profound thing I have ever heard any living being say. Don't stop here. If this story is speaking to something in you, hit like, subscribe to this channel right now, and share this video with someone who deserves to feel what you're feeling. It costs nothing, and it means everything. Thank you. In the years that followed, things changed. Not dramatically, not with fanfare or crises or sudden revelation. The vault stayed sealed. The wardens continued their work exactly as they always had. The sovereignty observers sat in their observation room, wrote their reports, and slowly, gradually, through simple proximity, began to understand the true shape of what they were witnessing. But the galaxy knew now. The galaxy knew about the vault. The galaxy knew about the wardens. The galaxy knew about the 5,000-year secret held by a species they had filed as negligible. And something shifted. Not in politics, not in formal treaties or trade agreements. Something quieter than that. Something that moved through culture like a tide. The sovereignty had long maintained a deep civilizational tendency that their own historians called inhonest moments. Civilizational condescension, the unspoken, largely unexamined assumption that older was wiser, that a civilization's age determined its worth, that the young species, at the edges of galactic society, were incomplete, provisional, works in progress, to be tolerated and gently guided, but never truly respected. That assumption fractured, not because of a war or a crisis or a formal declaration, because of a clay tablet in a sealed preservation case, because of 4 days of ordinary names, because of a small elderly woman saying, "We waited." The Thraci revised their educational curriculum. For 30,000 years, their historical education had begun with their own founding, their own first city, their own first language, their own first spacecraft. Now it began earlier. It began with the Prisa. It began with a small blue world at the edge of an unremarkable star system. It began with the question, what does it mean to be trusted with everything? And to honor that trust without witnesses, without recognition, without end. The Vokai composed new music. There is a Verki musical form, ancient and technically complex, called the wait song, sung only at moments of the most profound cultural reckoning, moments when a civilization must look at itself honestly and change. They had sung it twice in 9,000 years of history. They sang it a third time. When translated into human terms, the wait song begins. We did not know you. We did not know you were there. We did not know what you carried while we looked past you into the dark. Forgive us for the looking past. You deserved to be seen. You deserved to be known. The ripples of that knowledge moved outward through the galaxy in ways no one had predicted. Species that had never exchanged a single diplomatic communication found themselves in sudden, urgent conversation, not about borders or trade routes or military alliances, about responsibility, about what it meant to carry something on behalf of others who did not even know they needed carrying. A small amphibious species called the inhabitants of a tidally locked ocean world near the galactic core, had long maintained a tradition their neighbors found baffling. Every Velthoran adult spent 3 years of their life in service to what they called the Keeping. Not military service, not civic service in any recognizable political sense. Simply 3 years of their one life devoted to maintaining something they had been entrusted with. What they maintained varied by individual. It might be a seed vault, A freshwater reserve, a record of tidal patterns going back centuries. The point was not the specific thing. The point was the practice of being a keeper. When the news of the wardens reached the Valthoran, their council of keepers convened. Their deliberation lasted exactly 1 day. Then they sent a message to Earth. The message said only, "We have always known, in the back of our understanding, that there were others like us. People who kept things because keeping was right. Not because they would be thanked, not because history would remember them, but because something needed keeping and they were the ones who were there. We have kept our small things for centuries. You have kept the greatest thing we can imagine for 50 centuries. We are honored to share a galaxy with you." The Valthoran message was not famous in the way that the Resi Revision or the Verkaiwait song became famous. It was smaller, more private. The Warden Council read it aloud at their next annual gathering, and every warden in that room, hardened keepers, all of them, trained since childhood not to need recognition, trained to do the work in silence and shadow and to need nothing back. Every one of them wept. There were those in the sovereignty who did not take the revelation well. There always are. A faction of the Dresgali, the second oldest species in the sovereignty at 20,000 years, published a widely distributed argument that the vault should have been reported immediately upon humanity's first contact with the galactic community. That the Warden's continued secrecy after contact was a form of deception. That a species willing to maintain a 5,000-year secret could not be trusted to reveal what else it might be hiding. The argument was not entirely unreasonable, but it was answered, comprehensively and devastatingly, by an elderly human historian named Professor Chun Mashia, who had spent 60 years studying the Warden archive. She said, "The Wardens revealed the vault the moment it became strategically necessary to do so. Not 1 moment before, not 1 moment after. That is not deception. That is discipline. The purpose of the guardianship was not to share the secret. The purpose was to protect it until the time was right to share. Revealing it to an unprepared galaxy the moment contact was made would have been exactly the kind of premature disclosure the instructions specifically warned against." The Wardens judged correctly that 8 months was not enough time to determine whether the galaxy was ready for this conversation. They waited until they were found, and then they told the truth completely and without reservation. If that is the behavior of a species that cannot be trusted, I would very much like to know what trust looks like in your tradition. The Dreskali faction published no formal response. There was a school in Ankara that Ibrahim, al-Rashidi's daughter, attended. Her name was Yara. She was 12 years old when the vault was first discovered. She was 15 when the archive was published. She was 22 when the vault was opened and sealed again. She had grown up knowing who her father was and what he did. She had grown up knowing who she was, what blood ran in her, what weight her family had carried 4 generations back further than memory. She had grown up being prepared. The year the vault was opened and sealed, she took her warden oath. She stood in the same small ceremony room where the 4-day reading of names had taken place. She stood before the full Warden Council and the sovereignty observers, and she spoke the oath in the dead language, the first language, the Warden's language, exactly as every warden before her had spoken it. The oath was short, 17 words in the original language. Translated loosely, they meant, "I am the door I hold. I wait. I do not open before the world is whole." When she finished, her father, standing in the back of the room, closed his eyes for a long moment. He was not ashamed to cry. The Theresi observer present, a young student of the newly revised curriculum, wrote in her field notes that evening, "I watched a man today who has spent his entire adult life doing one of the most important things anyone has ever done in this galaxy, and who was moved to tears, not by recognition or ceremony, but by watching his daughter choose to continue doing it. I think I understand now something I could not understand from the history books. The Wardens do not guard the vault because they were told to. They guard it because they chose to. Every single one of them, every generation, made the same free choice. Yes, I will carry this. I will be the door. Wilold. That is not obedience. That is something much more powerful. That is the civilization's character, expressing itself fully. We're almost at the end of this story now. But before we get there, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe and share this video with someone who would be moved by it. Your support is what makes these stories possible, and we are deeply grateful. The years after the opening settled into something that felt remarkably like normalcy. A new kind of normalcy, a galactic normalcy that had not existed before. The sovereignty held its first full philosophical summit, a gathering not of politicians and diplomats, but of thinkers and teachers and artists, specifically to discuss what the Warden revelation had changed, what it meant as a civilization, as a community of species spread across the stars. To know that someone had been keeping their existential safety without asking for anything in return. The summit lasted 40 days and produced no formal resolutions. It produced something more durable. A shift, a quiet but unmistakable shift in how galactic civilization talked about itself. The sovereignty's official historical record was amended. Not rewritten, not falsified. Amended. An additional first chapter was inserted into the official history, Chapter 0. Some called it. It covered the pre-silence era as best it could be reconstructed. It covered the Vault, the Builders, the choice they had made, and it covered the small blue world and its people who had been trusted with the weight of everything and who had carried it in silence until the galaxy was ready to know. The chapter ended with the same words that the Builder's letter had used. Thank you for holding the door until the rest of the family came home. In some translations, in some cultures, those words became a greeting. Not a formal diplomatic greeting, an informal one. One, the kind you say between people who understand each other. In the Verkai language, the phrase crystallized into a single compound word that meant, very approximately, one who carries what others have not yet learned to carry. It became a word of honor, a word of recognition. Not just for wardens, for anyone who held something difficult and necessary, for longer than they should have had to hold it. For anyone who kept the door. Ibrahim al-Rohidi, retired at 63. Not from the wardens, not from the duty, not from the keeping. He simply handed his archive responsibilities to younger wardens and took a quieter role. Advisory, educational. He spent his last years teaching, not in a formal school, in his kitchen, mostly. Warden children and young initiates who would come to his apartment and sit at his table while he cooked, and ask him the same questions the alien delegations had asked him years before. How do you carry it? How do you live a normal life? How do you do this without it consuming everything? He always gave the same answer. Different words each time. The same answer. You wake up in the morning. You do the work. You love the people around you. You pass it to the next generation with your hands open, not gripping it, not clinging to it as if it defines you, but offering it the way you would offer bread to someone who needs it. This is yours now. Be worthy of it. That is all. That is the entire practice. Warden Yara al-Rashidi, by the time she was 40, was considered one of the finest archivists in the order. She had her father's steadiness, his ability to carry without breaking, his teacher's instinct for knowing when to explain and when to simply show. She had also inherited, or developed, something else, a way of explaining the work to outsiders that made them understand it in a way that most wardens found difficult to articulate. Sci-Fi. In an interview that was later widely reproduced, people ask us how we can guard something we don't fully understand, how we can protect a vault whose contents we have been specifically instructed not to examine closely, how we can devote our lives to keeping a door when we don't know precisely what is on the other side. And I always say, that is the wrong way to look at it. We are not guarding what we don't understand. We are honoring a trust that was placed in us. The trust is what we guard. The vault is just the vault. The trust is the thing that cannot be broken. The trust is the thing that, if we keep, it proves to the universe that intelligence can choose to be responsible. That knowledge does not have to become use. That power can be held and not exercised. That there are beings in the galaxy capable of saying, "This is not mine to open. Not yet." And meaning it, and being right. We keep the trust. We have always kept the trust. That is what the wardens are. Not soldiers, not priests. Proof. Proof that the answer to the deepest question can be kept safe long enough for everyone to be ready to hear it. Sorvenica lived to be 412 years old. She retired from diplomatic service at 380 and spent her final decades writing her memoirs. They were considered among the finest diplomatic memoirs in sovereignty history. But the passage most quoted, most discussed, most taught in universities across 30 worlds, was not about any of her 47 first contacts. It was not about treaty negotiations or historical breakthroughs. It was a single paragraph about a gray Tuesday morning in Geneva, about sitting across a table from a human woman who looked at her with the patient, settled eyes of someone who had been carrying something impossible for so long that she had forgotten it was impossible. The passage read, "In all my centuries of diplomatic service, I believed I had seen every form of strength a civilization could display. Military strength, economic strength, cultural influence, technological achievement. I was wrong. I had missed the deepest form, the strength of a people who were trusted with the hardest thing imaginable, and who simply, quietly, without drama, without demand, without recognition, did the job. 5,000 years, not because they had to. Because someone asked. Because they said yes. I have negotiated with the most powerful civilizations in this galaxy. I have sat across from beings who commanded star fleets and species who could move moons. I have never been as moved, as genuinely humbled, as I was sitting across from that one tired human woman who had spent her life guarding a door and wanted nothing more than to finally, responsibly, set down the key. And so, that is the story. Not a story about weapons or wars or great discoveries. Not really. It is a story about a question, the deepest question there is, whether everything should continue, and about the answer that one small, extraordinary people gave, not in words, not in philosophy or argument or debate, but in the only way that really counts. Be so every day. For 5,000 years. By keeping the door, by holding the weight without putting it down, by passing it from hand to hand, generation to generation, in ordinary kitchens and ordinary ceremonies and ordinary lives, lived extraordinarily well, by trusting that the galaxy would, in time, be worthy of the question, and by waiting, patiently, completely, with absolute faith, until that time arrived. The Wardens did not save the galaxy with weapons. They saved it with patience, with discipline, with the quiet, unbreakable decision made fresh every single morning by 12,000 ordinary people across 5,000 years, to be worthy of the trust that had been placed in them. You are the door. Do not let it open before the world is whole. The world is whole now. The family is home. The door held, it always held. Thank you for watching this story all the way to the very end. If it moved you, if it stayed with you, if it made you feel something real and lasting, please hit like, subscribe to this channel right now, and share this video with everyone you know who deserves to feel what you just felt. Stories like this one exist because of you, because you watch, and you share, and you come back. Thank you for being here. We will see you in the next one. And if you are a warden, wherever you are, whatever door you hold in your own life, whether it is large or small, whether the galaxy knows your name or never will, whether you carry your weight openly or in quiet and in shadow, know this. Someone sees you. Someone knows what you are doing and why you are doing it. And it matters more than you know. Every door held is a world protected. Every trust kept is proof that intelligence can be worthy of itself. Every ordinary person who wakes up in the morning and chooses to carry the weight one more day, one more year, one more generation, is part of the longest and most important story ever told. The story that says, we were trusted and we were worthy, and we held. Go be worthy of what you carry. The galaxy is watching, and this time it finally knows your name. The story of the Wardens did not end when the vault was opened. It did not end when the letter was read or when the family came home. Stories like this one do not end. They continue in the hands of the people who carry them forward, in the Warden children who learn the dead language first, in the sovereignty students who now begin their history with Chapter 0, and the Veltharin keepers who sent their quiet message and meant every word, in the wait songs that the Verkai will sing for another 9,000 years, In the writings of the woman who went inside and never spoke again, but filled 2,000 pages with everything she understood, so that the rest of us might someday understand it too. The story continues, because the keeping continues, because the door still stands, because every morning, somewhere beneath the Anatolian plateau, the vault rests in the dark exactly as it has always rested, exactly as it was sealed, exactly as it was entrusted, and somewhere above it, ordinary people do their ordinary work and live their ordinary lives, and carry, quietly, and without asking anything in return, the extraordinary weight of being trusted with the deepest question of all, whether everything should continue. The answer, chosen freely, chosen together, with open eyes, is yes. It has always been yes. The wardens knew that too. They kept the door, not because they feared the answer. They kept the door because they knew the galaxy needed time to be ready to choose it for itself. That is the gift. That is the whole of the gift. Not the technology. Not the vault. Not the 47 terrible, beautiful arguments. The time that humanity held open for the rest of the galaxy. 5,000 years of time held in steady, ordinary, unbroken human hands. Until the world was whole, until the family came home. You are the door. You held. Thank you. The wardens published their full archive 10 years after the discovery. Not the vault. Not its contents. Not the technical specifications of anything inside, but the records of the guardianship itself. Everything. The names. The protocols. The close calls. The 3 who had tried to break containment across 5,000 years. The full documented history of every warden order in every era and culture. And the writings of the woman who had gone inside. Her 40 years of silence and writing, finally made public. 2,000 pages. Carefully translated. Carefully annotated. Containing no equations. No diagrams. No technical specifications. Entirely, completely philosophical. The most read document in human history within a single year of publication. Within a decade, translated into 40 sovereignty languages and studied in universities across the entire galactic arm. What the writings contained, at their core, was this. A description of what it feels like to see the full shape of a question that most minds are never constructed to hold. A description of what it means to understand that existence is not guaranteed. That it is, in some deep structural sense, a choice that's somewhere built into the architecture of the universe by a civilization that had reached the furthest reachable edge of intelligence, was a mechanism for making that choice. Consciously, completely, with full awareness of every consequence. And that the mechanism was sealed, and that the seal was held by people who had been given something extraordinary, something no other species in the galaxy had ever been given, the knowledge that existence was fragile, and the responsibility of protecting it anyway, and the wisdom to do it in secret, without glory, without recognition, without the galaxy even knowing they existed. For as long as it took, one passage from the writings became particularly famous. It was quoted in academic papers and political speeches and carved into monuments on 14 different worlds. It said, "I have seen the argument for ending. It is coherent. It is not the work of madness. It is, in its own terrible way, beautiful. The civilization that built it was not evil. They built the argument for ending for the same reason they built the argument for continuing, because they had reached the place where they needed to choose. Consciously, fully, with total comprehension. Whether existence was worth the cost of its own continuation, they could not make that choice for all of us. They were wise enough to understand that. So they sealed both arguments away, and they found a small people on a young world, and they said, 'Hold this. Hold it until the rest of the galaxy can sit with the question without flinching. Until the rest of the galaxy can look at both the ending and the continuing and choose with genuinely open eyes. I have looked at both primera. I be chosen. I will not tell you which. Because the choice must be yours. Each of you. All of you. Together. That is the only kind of choosing that carries any real weight. The sovereignty vote took 6 months to complete. 6 months of formal deliberation. 6 months of debate across 43 species and their philosophers and scientists and historians and ordinary working people who had never previously been asked to think about whether existence should continue and were now being asked to think about nothing else. The process was not always dignified. Some species panicked. Some withdrew temporarily. Some demanded delays. 2 smaller species voted no immediately out of undisguised fear and maintained that position throughout the entire process. But the conversation that surrounded the vote was broader and deeper and more honest than any the sovereignty had conducted in 11,000 years, because for the first time, they were not debating territory or resources or trade rights. They were debating existence itself. They were being asked to grow up all at once, to do what the woman who went inside the vault had done alone in 3 days, and then spent 40 years quietly writing about. In the end, the vote fell short of unanimous. 2 species voted no. The threshold required unanimity. The vault stayed sealed, but what happened next was remarkable in a different way. The 2 species who had voted no asked to read the writings again. They read them carefully for 6 months. Then they asked to speak to a warden. Not a diplomat, not a secretary general or a council representative, a warden. An ordinary warden who had grown up with a duty and learned to carry it without being broken by it. Please hit like, subscribe, and share before you keep reading. These stories reach people because viewers like you spread them. Your support makes this possible, and we're grateful for every single one of you. The 2 species sent small delegations to Ankara. They sat with a warden named Ibrahim al-Rashidi, 44 years old, former secondary school teacher, 3rd-generation warden, keeper of the Northern Archive section, a man who described himself, when asked, as neither particularly brave nor particularly wise, simply trained, simply prepared, simply committed to doing what he had been asked. The delegation sat with Ibrahim for 2 full weeks. They toured the archive with him. They ate meals with him. They watched him do his ordinary daily work. They asked him everything they could think of, not about the vault's technology, not about the pre-silent civilization or the physics of reality weapons, about how do you carry something this heavy as an ordinary, daily fact of your life? How do you teach children mathematics and make dinner and fall in love and live a recognizable human life while knowing that beneath your feet is a sealed room, containing the structured arguments for whether everything should continue? How does that not break a person every single day? Ibrahim al-Rashidi thought carefully for a long time before answering. He poured tea. He looked out the window at the ordinary Ankara street below. He thought for a long time. Then he said, "You do what you were asked, not because you have fully understood it all, not because you feel certain you are doing it right, not because you know the final answer to the question in the vault. You do it because someone, a very long time ago, looked at everything that was possible in the universe, all the magnificent and terrible possible things, and decided that the best thing to do with the worst of them was to find someone to trust, and they trusted us. That is it. That is genuinely the whole reason. Someone trusted us with something they could not carry alone, and we decided to be worthy of that trust. One day at a time, across 5,000 years. And we will keep deciding. Every day, for every warden who comes after us. For as long as it takes, because that is what it means to be trusted with something. You do not put it down just because it is heavy. You put it down when it is safe to put it down, and not one single moment before. The 2 delegations went home. 6 months later, they changed their votes. The 2nd council vote was unanimous. They opened the vault on a Tuesday morning in early spring, the kind of Tuesday where the light is new and the air is cold and clean. Of course, it was a Tuesday, in the presence of representatives of every sovereignty member species, in the presence of the full Warden Council, in the presence of Secretary-General Li Waisan and Archdiplomat Sorfenaka, in the presence of Eldest Von of the Thoresi, 300 centuries of civilization standing quietly in a room that was 5,000 years in the making, in the presence of Shimmer in Stillwater, no longer young, no longer keeping a journal, because she had stopped needing to write things down to remember them. They opened the vault. The technology inside was exactly as the scans had suggested. Exactly as terrifying, exactly as powerful. Exactly as world-ending in its implications as every physicist and philosopher had warned, but also exactly as the woman's writings had described. Not merely weapons, not merely arguments for ending. Arguments for everything. The full shape of the question, built in metal and energy and structured space, every possible answer, from destruction to continuation and everything between. And at the very center of the vault, placed there deliberately, unmistakably, intentionally, as if it had been waiting, in a sealed case of its own that the scan had somehow missed or misidentified, was one final object. Not a device, not a weapon, not a machine of any kind. A letter, written in the same language as the original instruction. The dead language. The warden's first language. The one they taught their children before anything else, so they would always know, in the oldest words available to them, what they were there to do. Warden Archivist Fatima Hassan read it aloud. Her voice was completely steady. She had been training for this moment since the age of 7. The letter said, "If you are reading this, then the people we chose were worthy, and the galaxy learned, in whatever time it needed, to be worthy of the question alongside them. We are gone. We have been gone for a very long time. But we left this here for you, not as a weapon, not as a burden or a test or a final examination, as a gift. The gift is not the technology inside this vault. The gift is the knowledge that you chose to continue, freely, together, with open eyes and full understanding. That is the only answer to the question that has ever truly mattered. Not the answer imposed by the powerful, not the answer forced by the desperate or the afraid, the answer chosen by everyone. Together, you're ready. You have always carried the capacity to be ready. You simply needed the time to find it. Thank you for waiting. Thank you, people of the small blue world, for holding the door until the rest of the family could find its way home. The vault was sealed again that same evening, not from fear, not from uncertainty, but because some things are worth protecting even after you are no longer afraid of them, even after you understand them. Especially then, the wardens remained. Of course, they remained, because a door that is worth opening is worth guarding, because the people who are trusted with something do not stop being trustworthy when the crisis is resolved. They carry it because it is theirs to carry. Ibrahim al-Rashidi drove home through the same Ankara streets he had always driven through, the same cafes, the same traffic, the same noise and warmth of an ordinary city living. He stopped at the same bakery where he always bought bread. He called his daughter, who was 12, who was already beginning her first warden lessons, and made dinner. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a person who had done what he was asked. A person who had held a door, who had waited, and somewhere beneath his feet, 400 meters straight, down through solid ancient earth, the vault rested in the dark, sealed, guarded, safe. The door had held. It had always held. It would go on holding. Because that is what humans do. When they are trusted with something, they do not put it down. When they are asked to wait, they wait. When they are given the weight of everything, they carry it quietly through 5,000 years of ordinary days, without recognition, without glory, without the galaxy even knowing they are there, until the world is whole, until the family comes home, until the Tuesday in early spring when the door can finally, safely, be opened. And then they seal it again, and they keep watch. Because that is who they are. That is who they have always been. The door holders. The ones who were trusted. The ones who were worthy of it. Thank you for staying with this story all the way to its final word. If it moved you, if it made you feel something real, please hit like. Subscribe to this channel right now, and share this video with everyone you think deserves to hear it. Every like, every subscription, every share is how stories like this one find the people who need them. We'll see you in the next one.